Good afternoon, welcome to the January 18, 2024 NPO call session. And note we do have a quorum. Ask for a vote to approve the agenda. Motion to approve.
I would move the agenda as presented.
Moved by Mark, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Abstentions, motion carries. Item we'll take on the minutes next. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the November and December meetings? Come on, people.
I would move the approval of the minutes.
Move approval.
November 14th.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Abstentions, motion carries. All right, we're going to take the agenda just slightly out of order due to the weather outside and well, okay, we can get through that. Let's do the consent and vote on the financial statement. Ted, did you want to have any comments on that?
Yeah, not really. Financial statement was reviewed by the subcommittee and there were no issues or concerns. It was approved unanimously.
All right.
Move approval, Mr. Chair.
Motion.
I did, Des Moines.
Yeah, motion by Gatto, second by Jones. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Abstentions, motion carries. Do we have any comment on MPO actions? I don't think somebody signed up. All right, so, excuse me, we will take the next two presentations slightly out of order. So I'm gonna, due to the weather and wanting to get it back on the road before it gets too worse, I'm gonna turn it over to item 7, our executive director search process, and turn it over to Sandra Walls.
Well, thank you, everyone. It's good to see everybody in person and virtually. You'll have to tell me where the camera's at. Oh, it's right in the center. Okay. So I'm going to start out telling everybody again, we are moving very quickly with our process and we have stayed true to our schedule. Very excited that we have made all of our deadlines to this point. I know attached to your packet, we have continued to provide our scope of work and our report. I want to recognize the new members that are around the table with us today. So if any of you would like to connect with me and walk through the process that we have taken to get to this point, I am happy to do that to bring you up to speed. We started our process November 29th. I had to look back at my own report to say that it was just yesterday when we started our process. But our first major milestone in the project was actually before the end of the year. We had our draft of the job description and the posting, and the posting went live on January 8th. So again, just 10 days ago, we posted the position with our proposed salary range, and we posted the position in our intended goal was 19 different outlets for promoting the position, and we've been able to leverage 15 of the 19 places that we had anticipated posting the position. Our investment in posting the position to date is around $1,250. So we've been very fortunate in using our budget in that Axios actually gifted us their posting, and none of the planning associations have charged for their posting. So we've been very good with our budget and moving forward. A couple of other things to recognize with publishing the posting for the position. Our active date for the posting is January 8th, but as we had talked about that, we know that some of the postings weren't actually live on January 8th because we have to hit the rounds of the newsletters and when some of the publications happen. So our active date is January 8th, but we've had some of those postings that have just gone live on January 16th. So this is a little bit tricky in that our deadline for the applications is January 26th. So we wanted to honor the very aggressive schedule that the MPO put forward. So deadline to apply is January 26th. So some of the postings are just going live right now. So I say that on the heels of letting you know, so far we have received 4 applications. 3 of them are from within the state of Iowa, 1 application is from outside the state of Iowa. So we're also excited that our postings are reaching both in-state and out-of-state candidates. So we know we're getting good coverage at this point, even with as aggressive as our timeline is. The one last thing I will share is we do have another round of posting or another round of attention we will put on the posting on LinkedIn that will start this Saturday. So there's another piece of emphasis that will happen there. We did share an email on January 8th when we posted the position with the policy committee. For some of you who are new to our process, one of the things that we asked of all the policy committee members was being willing to share the posting with folks within your network to help us make sure we get the word of the posting out quickly and spreading that to your network. So we want to make sure to remind you that you have all the information that you need to be able to effectively share the position. And we also want to remind you to make sure that you are doing that. So I've got Diana here sitting at the ready to resend that email to you. So you've got that at the top of your inbox, because I know folks get busy. If you have folks that you would like to connect with the posting, but that's not something that you would like to do yourself, please let Diana know who those folks are, and she is absolutely happy to connect with folks. We just need to know who you would like us to share that with. So our job right now is folks are applying, so you know what's happening behind the scenes. As the applications are coming in, Diana is researching these folks. So it isn't just that we are receiving the applications and are waiting until February 5th, which is our next big milestone date. We are digging into these candidates and finding out more than just what is on paper. So we're learning about them. And I have my note here, just because someone may look good on paper, Diana is getting to know these folks probably better than they know themselves right now. So when we bring to you our recommendations, we know how they really stack up against what you're looking for, and we want to make sure we're bringing you the best of the best. We also are moving into the screening interviews. So being able to ask them those first round questions so we learn a little bit more about them in person. If they're meeting those minimum qualifications that we've talked about as a search committee, then we're digging into them even further with those Zoom interviews. So we have 2 Zoom interviews scheduled for next week, and Diana will be facilitating those. So our next step following the Zoom interviews is February 5th. This is a date I want to make sure everybody has on their calendar. So I'm going to give everybody a second if you want to look at your calendar. That is the next date that the search committee meets. But that is also a date that is open to all policy committee members if you would like to attend that meeting to observe and offer input. The search committee will be meeting from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And that is the day that Diana and I will present the candidate analysis report. During that meeting, we will provide our recommendations to the search committee about who we think should be invited to the in-person interviews. But the committee will also have the opportunity to really vet all of the applications that they'd like to go through, and if there's anybody else they'd like to consider, we'll walk through those resumes and information that we've gathered and determine who will be invited for the in-person interviews at that time. We'll also review the interview questions that will be leveraged in the in-person interviews. A couple of things that are really important is we do still need to maintain through this process confidentiality for the candidates. So this is a really unique step to this process. So we're still navigating some of the logistics of how we are going to handle that meeting, of having a lot of people in the room and maintaining confidentiality for the candidates. So it is really, really important you let us know if you plan to attend February 5th. Everybody online can give me a thumbs up that you got my gist here. You'll let me know if you're going to be there February 5th. Joe Gatto, I'm looking at you. All right. So please let us know if you're going to be there February 5th. It's a very tricky process, and then we can work to build the agenda for that day.
Should we send out an email to the committee, maybe just to have it
Yes.
apply? So we should, okay.
We will do that. Our goal at the end of February 5th is to hopefully have no more than 3 candidates that we move forward to our next step, which is February 15th. That is our goal for the day of doing in-person interviews. If you're already looking at your calendar for February 15th, you will recognize that that is a regular meeting date for the policy committee. Our goal is to do our interviews on February 15th, allow the search committee to review the interviews and be able to come forward with you for a recommendation for your consideration on the 15th as well. So I'm going to talk about February 15th here in just a second, but February 15th will be a really big day. So interviews February 15th. Okay, so talking about interviews. We've determined today the location for interviews will be at the Botanical Gardens. We're very excited about that. We have the ability to handle all of the process that we are going to have on the 15th. Parking should be convenient, moving candidates in and out of the process should be convenient. And we also wanted to accommodate the request of having a meet and greet opportunity for the candidates on the 15th. So to talk a little bit about logistics, the policy committee members asked for the opportunity to meet the candidates before an offer was presented to the candidate determined to be the best fit for the position. So we are trying to build that into the interview day. So this is the second date. As policy committee members, we need you to block your calendar if you would like to participate. It is not mandatory unless you would like to meet the candidates before the offer comes to you for your consideration. We don't have the full calendar figured out for the 15th, other than that is the day we will interview. Once we know how many candidates will move forward in the process, we'll be able to narrow the time frame and give you a more precise schedule. The interviews will happen in the morning. The networking meet and greet opportunities will immediately follow each interview. You'll meet one candidate at a time. So it really is going to be a flow of interview, meet and greet, search committee will do an interview, and then we'll do a meet and greet. The candidates will not be in the room together at the same time. So you'll have a break in between each candidate while they're in the interview process. So it is going to be a commitment of time for you on the 15th to participate in the meet and greets. And then of course your regular meeting is at the end of the day at 4 p.m. So we're asking a lot from you as policy committee members on the 15th, but we want to honor this is a huge decision for you as a committee. And so we're trying to be efficient. We're trying to be convenient, putting it all on one day, but it is a big ask for you all on one day. And again, I just want to emphasize the key with the networking reception is to make sure you have the opportunity to meet the candidates. But we will flow, essentially right from the networking into the being able to come into the meeting and be able to make a recommendation so you know who the candidates are. Policy committee meets at 4, I covered that. Trying to be concise, I know you have a full agenda. Any questions?
Maybe more about the 4 p.m. Is that also going to be at the Botanical Center, or are we coming back here for? I just thought.
Good question. I don't know.
I didn't know about the timing.
And we
Schedule.
It's a great idea.
do the meeting down there too. Yeah, maybe, yeah. It's probably what I used to do it. Yeah. Where we start now.
Okay.
Great idea.
We can do the, I mean.
Yeah, so we may have,
or,
yeah, we can take the
We'll
technology.
figure it out. That's a good idea. All right, anything else? We're gonna do it.
We will stay true to our report. We'll continue to update this. Just the key things about the report, we added a section where we're tracking all of the communication that we're providing. So if you feel like you've missed anything, just take a look at the end of the report. It's all of the notes there for the communication that we've sent. If you need copies of anything, the posting, the job description, anything we've done to date, just let me know. I will hold this up. We aren't going to share this just yet, but we do have the hiring insights document, which is the compilation of all the information from the surveys we did at the beginning of the process. We will release this later in the process, because this is informing, how we're moving forward. We don't want to release this just yet, but it is a great tool to the process, so. All right.
Great, thank you,
Thank
Cass,
you.
thank you, Diane, appreciate it.
Thank you.
And again, just as a reminder, you heard Cass talk about the February 5 meeting. We'll be getting an email out on that, so please respond to that so we can have an accurate count for that. Maybe that's one of the things you need to respond to, so I just appreciate it if you could respond, so we can have accurate information and accurate counts and all that, so, yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. All right, now we will move back to the presentation on transportation for America. Bill?
Thank you. Pleased to have with us today virtually Beth Osborne from Transportation for America. Transportation for America is an organization that we are a member of. I believe DART's also a member of. And they're very generous with their time to help us on legislative issues, funding issues, just general transportation best practices. Beth and her team have been here in person in Des Moines in the past to help us work through some technical exercises as we look at performance measures. We've gone to some of their leadership training events as well. And I think Beth has spoken on the DC trip, so she might be familiar to some of you. Too. And Beth herself has a wealth of experience formerly working for the U.S. Department of Transportation, also working for congressional members. So she understands the process of how decisions get made at DOT, in Congress, and so forth. And that's kind of where we will dovetail and hand it off to Beth to talk to us about how to be strategic and successful in our applications for federal funding. So with that, turn it over to Beth.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for inviting me to participate. We here in DC have gotten our first sizable snow in 2 years and are looking at more snow. We're talking in like the 3-inch range and cannot handle it. And I'm always, shamed when I hear about the sort of weather you all are facing. So just know I'm trying to imitate you all in your excellent handling of winter weather. I am the director of Transportation for America. Transportation for America is a national nonprofit, and our mission is a transportation system that connects people to jobs and essential services, no matter how they travel, no matter how much money they earn, and no matter their physical abilities. And we work with folks directly, like with you all, on ways to get greater value for their funds, ways to measure the impact of transportation, best practices in transportation, knocking down barriers to those best practices, and making sure you just have direct access to the opportunity to make your vision happen. So before I get into particularly my focus today, which is how to best position yourself to compete for the record amount of federal dollars that are available through competitive grants, I just wanted to ground us in what the federal program looks like now and remind folks of the flexibility of the funding that is out there, even if it is formula and even if it's not necessarily directly within your control. So if you jump to the next slide, this is a breakdown of the IIJA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill that was passed in 2021. And you will see here that lovely, pleasant light green makes up a little more than half of the pie. And that's what goes to the Surface Transportation Program. Within that half, what is particularly notable and what really changed in the IIJA and therefore in the overall program is the amount of money going to rail. That chunk of the pie for rail is basically the same size as the transit program now. That's an extraordinary change from where we were before this past bill. The highway and transit program remain basically where we were before reauthorization in relation to each other. They're just sized up. On the next slide, you will see a breakdown of the highway program, and 75% of the funding is going out through the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program and the National Highway Performance Program, both of which are very flexible programs. through practice, sometimes states and metropolitan planning organizations and localities have constricted the way they utilize these funds, but it's not because they have to. It is because they just got used to it. The STBG funds can be used for anything that you could spend any of the programs on, and the transit program. And the National Highway Performance Program can fund almost as much so long as it is in a national highway corridor. I just say that to remind you all that, while a lot of that funding might be overcommitted, those funds can be made available to your priorities too, even if it's not sub-allocated to you, because that funding is supposed to be used by the state to address its needs wherever they are. I also know a lot of attention go to things like the Highway Safety Improvement Program, the Carbon Reduction Program, but I did want folks to see it in scale, that those are little tiny slivers of the pie. The big portion are the two in red and blue here. So moving on to the next slide, USDOT is controlling over $200 billion in competitive grants. And a lot of that, I will admit, is for rail and for transit. And you all might be focusing more on the utilization of some of the highway programs or the more flexible programs like what is now known as the RAISE program. On the next slide, one of the things I really think is super important is to recognize the breadth and scope of these various programs, but also how they overlap. And that I know causes confusion. So we provide information about all the different eligibilities in the program. We also help people understand what USDOT means. Sometimes you see overlapping eligibility, but it's not really how they treat the program. So if there's ever a question, please do feel free to just reach out and say, we've got this project and we really think it's going to fit well in, they call it the infra program, but the National Significant Highway, Freight and Highway Projects Program. Do you agree? Do you think it really fits there? Is this what they mean? I also want to point out that the Safe Streets and Roads for All program has an interesting and unusual opportunity available. Congress messed up the way they drafted this program. The original intention of the program was for 10% of it to be made available for planning. However, it was written in as, unfortunately, 40% of the program is now reserved specifically for planning. That's way too much for planning. It's way more planning than anyone in the nation needs. All of the nation needs. People want to move from plans to action and capital, but the way the program was written, it is hamstrung USDOT in meeting the need for capital improvements. And they have, at this point, hundreds of millions of dollars in unspent planning funds. They have, however, defined planning to include demonstration projects. These are more temporary interventions to demonstrate what a roadway redesign might look like or a safety intervention might look like, using paint, using delineators, using bollards, using street furniture, all those sorts of things. And I have it on good word that if you submit an application and it meets the basic eligibility requirements, the answer is going to be yes, because they have too much money and not enough demand for the planning funds. So I did just want to put that on your radar. If there were some efforts across the city, maybe in an area that wasn't sure what they wanted to do with a stretch of roadway that hasn't been as, very safe, or maybe they want to improve a connection from a neighborhood to a school, but they weren't ready to agree to a particular solution. This is a great way to address it, to do a demonstration project and engage the community in that potential. They are able to respond to the potential changes in a much more meaningful way when it isn't just a sketch. So if you want more information, we've worked on demonstration projects all across the country, and we can certainly help you all think that through and develop it, but it's an enormous amount of money. DOT is desperate to spend it, and I don't think there could ever be enough applications for it. So just keep that in mind. Going on to the next, so in terms of the demonstration projects, and I've included this in the PowerPoint, we have links to examples of demonstration projects we've done. We did 3 within the state of Washington. That was about 2 years ago. We worked with Orlando, Lexington, and South Bend. And we have some other projects that were, I think it's Pittsburgh, Durham, and I'm going to forget the third community, and I apologize to it, even though it doesn't come to my head. And we are about to put out another set of projects. We did 3 in the state of Connecticut, 3 in the state of Tennessee, 3 in California, and 1 in Alaska. So lots of information for ideas, and hopefully that will be helpful. Going on to the next slide. I want to remind folks, again, competitive grant applications in transit and rail are available too. The rail projects have some really interesting, or the rail program has interesting things beyond just capital. There's a process to apply for a corridor recognition that comes with funding to plan the corridor. And there is also an opportunity to be recognized as an interstate rail compact that also comes with funding. So keep your eyes open if there are rail plans in the area. And when it comes to intercity passenger rail, it's really about a lot more than the funding. It's really about creating the interstate relationships, the infrastructure, the agreements with the freight railroads, and doing the proper planning in order to unlock those funds. So getting into the nitty-gritty on the next slide, and I apologize for the text heaviness of the slides, but I wanted to have a leave behind for you all. Don't start with the program. Start with the projects that you are prioritizing, that you want to get done. And then build a funding portfolio from that project. I have found that when areas do that, they will get very creative, but they will also be able to make a much more compelling case to USDOT about why they should be a recipient of funding. I love the example of Denver Union Station. It was almost a $500 million project. My light just went off. Well over a decade ago. And they have 10 different funding sources that went into it. And they were the first project sponsor to get USDOT to do a TIFIA loan and a RIF loan on the same project. They forced USDOT to figure out a procedure for that. And that's because they had put together a sophisticated, interesting, and complete project, and then were making the case for funding. And they were able to move all kinds of agencies, both within USDOT, within Homeland Security, and all, within their state, because of the brilliant way they put together the proposal. Now, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk more about how you talk to USDOT. Overall prioritization of your applications from the region are important. It isn't just about any rules that USDOT has in terms of limiting the number of applications. It's about making clear that priorities have been set, that the region is working together, and that loyalties are not divided. At USDOT, they are required to have geographic distribution, a fair geographic distribution. So if they get lots of applications from one state or one region within a state, they are going to have to choose between them. And they are not going to be able to get to every region. So it's easier on them to just go to a united region than pick between a bunch of different projects in a region. It's not to say you can't submit more than one, but if you have a bunch coming in, it shows a lack of partnership. And in a tiebreaker situation, that's going to create some difficulty. Match the program objectives to the program criteria. That is maybe an obvious statement, but I want to make clear you don't have to hit every criterion listed. In most of the programs, you're really looking at knocking it out of the park on 2 to 3. And then USDOT is looking to put together a portfolio of projects that address all criteria. Some of the programs like the RAISE program, which was called the Tiger program when I was at USDOT and when I ran the program, it had broad criteria, but a finite list. And we always looked for projects that were just amazing on 2 to 3. And if they hit the other 2, great, but they didn't have to hit it out of the park across the board. In other programs, Congress sets the criteria, and you will notice that it often feels very negotiated. So at that point, you really want to read the notice well to see what USDOT is emphasizing there. Obviously, the eligibility criteria also matters. Look if there are time limitations. This is something that folks mess up on, and especially if a project requires a lot of permitting, that can be an issue. However, I want to point out that it should not dissuade you from applying, even if there's a little risk. USDOT also tries to create a portfolio of projects, some that are very low lifts with regard to the National Environmental Policy Act or permitting and things like that, and some that might be a little bigger of a lift and therefore a little more risky. The more you can remove that uncertainty by making clear that you have started the processes necessary, it's going to make USDOT feel more comfortable. Number 3 is the thing I probably have said more times to more potential applicants, and that is the story needs to be told clearly enough that someone who has never been to your community and has no grounding in transportation can understand at least the introduction. Because the way the reviews work in USDOT, there are so many applications, it has to jump off the page. It has to be easy to digest and easy to understand. Right up front, this is an application for X dollars for a project that will connect, Y to Z in these communities. It will do exactly this thing. We're going to, we're going to build a grade separation across this railroad in this community. And then when you get into why that's good, it all makes sense. I can't tell you how many applications I've read that I get 5 or 6 pages in, learning how important this project is, and I can't tell you what the project is. It is one of the biggest mistakes made in these applications. It seems obvious, but it is a regular mistake made. So hand it over to someone that doesn't do transportation. Ask them to read your intro or your summary and make sure it makes sense to them. And then you want to build a strong, broad coalition of support. Partners on the project, supporters in your delegation, and things like that. Going on to the next slide, this is a description. I think the next slide is a description of the process within USDOT to demystify the way USDOT reviews your application. I get the most questions on this front. If we can just jump to the next slide. I get the most questions on this front about how the decisions actually get made. And this is exactly how it works on all of their programs. There are generally 3 career staffers on a program like RAISE that is multimodal. It's going to come from a bunch of different modal agencies. So you might have someone from the Office of the Secretary, from Federal Highways, and from MERAD or something like that. For the programs that are more focused, for example, new starts, that's going to be all within FTA. So it changes a little bit, but it always starts with review at the career staff level, no politicals involved. And they are the first review, and they will give projects a rating. And that rating is highly recommended, recommended, acceptable, not recommended. Highly recommended, very easy to understand. recommended as well. Acceptable is a project that basically meets the requirements, but it just doesn't leap off the page. And not recommended is a project with an active problem. The highly recommended are all automatically sent on to for a political review. But because Congress has told USDOT on so many programs that there must be geographic equity or modal equity or rural urban splits, if one of those equities aren't addressed, they will go deeper into the recommendeds to pull some of those out to fill out the equities for that review. So let's say no transit state of repair projects came through at all. We'll go grab a recommended transit state of repair. Or we didn't get enough rural projects. We'll go into recommended to pull some rural projects. Or not one project from, the state of Idaho came through. Go grab a recommended from the state of Idaho to make sure that we have a good pool. And then the political review is going to include all of the assistant secretaries, the undersecretary, usually the deputy secretary, and all the heads of the major modal agencies, federal highways, transit, maritime, and railroad. And that's the first time the regulatory issues are really looked at. Is this project going to require, an environmental impact statement or environmental impact review? Is this going to involve, some kind of historic preservation review? Those sorts of questions. And then the benefit cost analysis is considered here. To be clear, if there's a benefit cost analysis required, it is only required to make sure that the costs do not exceed the benefits. That's it. It's a yes or a no. And then they move on. And they review for all of their various criteria and the rules Congress put forward. The secretary reviews a slate way too big to fund. And that's when some final distribution is considered. And a lot of times people want to know when calls from your delegation are considered. This is the part. And it's a tiebreaker round. If there is if you've got 1.5 times the projects that you can fund, why not use as a tiebreaker the one that has the most support? And if there's a tiebreaker, I remember the state of Washington always got too many projects through. It's not a big state. We couldn't fund 5 and 6 projects from the state of Washington. We could fund 2. So how do you break that down? Which one has the most united support? That's really how it's used, and that's it. I can also tell you about phone calls I had with members of Congress who really loved a project that the reviewers did not, and we were very clear on that. And we said, that's great. It was not recommended or highly recommended. It's your second favorite project. So I hope that helps give you a sense of how that review process works and where your congressional delegation matters and where they don't have as much impact. And on the last slide, I just wanted to talk about a couple things that sets a region apart. I'll start with number 4, a good track record of delivering projects. Maybe you got a grant in the past. It was, it doesn't mean you didn't run into trouble. It just meant you handled it well. You met all the requirements. That's always good. But also demonstrating that you yourself have a strategic approach to how you allocate your funding, and you're tracking in a way that helps you make a more compelling case, but explains why your region is more thoughtful than others. And therefore, this project comes out of a process that scrutinizes what you're doing in terms of the outcomes you're trying to achieve. You can therefore define past successes in a more meaningful way than a lot of other regions can. And this is something that I think Des Moines is really well situated to compete in, because you all have a performance measure evaluation criteria. You are looking at projects and connecting them to your regional goals in a way that in and of itself is compelling. So projects that are being evaluated by you all are getting a scrutiny that a lot of places don't put on projects. It, like, again, helps you tell a really good story, but also shows USDOT that you are thinking about how you allocate limited dollars the same way they are thinking about allocating limited dollars, by connecting project funding decisions to overall goals and outcomes you're seeking. All right, that was a ton of things that I threw at you. Like I said, in the PowerPoint, I have some links to resources that could be helpful to folks, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have now or later.
Any questions for Beth? Again, a lot of information, thank you for that. Go ahead, Carl.
Gunnar, will you be making this stack available to us?
Yes, indeed. Yep. And we'll send out the links that that's referring to after the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Beth.
My pleasure.
All right, moving on then to item 8, is presentation of vote on the fiscal year 23 audit, and to join us to present that is Joe Sparks from Denman and Company. Joe.
Hi, everyone, thanks for having me. I'm Joe Sparks. I'm the audit manager at Denman and Company. I helped perform the majority of the field work this year. I'm kind of stepping in for Dave Ellis, the partner, as he's out of town today. Dave presented the audit in front of the finance subcommittee and the executive committee. They recommended it for their approval. So I'll kind of briefly go through the audit here. If you have any questions at the end, feel free to let me know. Starting on page 3 of the audit report is the most important part. Probably you guys want to see is our audit opinion for the year. We issued a clean opinion, unmodified opinion, which is what you want to hear. So going forward here, let's move to the MD&A. On page 8 of the audit report here, this is your MD&A, breaks down, kind of summarized version of the balance sheet. The assets for the year increased by $3.5 million. This is largely due to the receivables related to the Water Trails project. Liabilities increased by $3.9 million, which is also has to do with those receivables with the Water Trails project. Overall net position increased by about $69,000. The rest of the activity, not including the Water Trails project, remained relatively similar to the prior year, as expected. I'm kind of going to skip through back to the end of the report where we kind of discuss our findings. If you want to go to page 40 of the audit report. So here is our report on the single audit uniform guidance. So this is the federal programs. The 2 major programs this year were the Water Trails project and then the Transportation Planning project. We did not have any findings related to non-compliance or during this year. We did have a couple findings which are similar to the prior years on page 44 and 45 of the report. The 2 comments we had relate to segregation of duties and financial reporting. These are similar comments to what we've had in the past, but we did modify them a little bit to change the recommendation and responses. The main change here in regard to segregation of duties is there was an employee handbook that was approved in August of 2023. We believe with the changes that were recommended in this employee handbook and the new segregation of duties between Dylan and Rhonda and the rest of the staff there, that we might be able to take this comment off in future years. If those procedures are followed as they're laid out in the handbook. On the following page is the financial reporting comment. This comment was modified a little bit to document the receivables and payables, or related to the receivables and payables. We had a few significant adjustments, specifically related to the Water Trails project. We discussed this with management, and we think that going forward, we have these adjustments figured out, and the year-end journal entries necessary are figured out to how we take this comment off in the future. On page 47 of the audit report is our statutory reporting required by the state auditor's office. We didn't have any comments related to budget, questionable disbursements, travel expense, business transactions, or any of the other items in that listing. And finally, on page 48 of the report is our corrective action plan, which is required reporting. And we reference here that back to the comments where we have our responses. Overall, the audit went pretty smooth this year. I think we got it done faster than we've had in the past. Dylan and Rhonda and the rest of the team did a great job getting everything ready for us. And we are hopeful that going forward, we'll be able to take these comments off as long as the recommendations and responses are followed in fiscal year 24. Any questions you guys have regarding the audit?
Questions for Joe?
I know that's pretty brief, but I think the majority of you guys have heard this already once or twice, so.
Yeah, this has been reviewed by our finance committee and also by executive as well, so we vetted it through there as well. But certainly need to have it here as well, so certainly happy to answer any questions if there are.
No question, have a comment. I really appreciate all the work that's obviously been done on this to get us to where we are today, and I hope we're able to continue that in the future. So it took a lot to get there. Yeah, I just want to make sure and hope we have a good audit next year. Thank you.
You want to move it?
I will move.
All right, approval. There's a. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Abstentions? All right, that motion carries. All right, thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Item 9 is report and vote on the filling of the officer vacancies. As you can see in the report, we have just kind of a short-term issue with regard to officers on the MPO. Stephanie Reba was the vice chair. She did not seek re-election and was no longer a city council member, no longer a representative of Norwalk on the MPO. Ted Weaver is our current treasurer and but will not be representing that sub area in the future. So I guess technically have 2 vacancies. But it's only for a month since we'll have new officers taking office in March. So we discussed this as far as, what we should do on this. And at the exec level, at least we discussed having possibly Ted to stay on as treasurer for now, but also then, he would also then take the place of Stephanie as vice chair. So we'll hold both offices until March, until the new officers are then appointed. So that is that is where we are right now. Been happy to discuss and answer any questions on that. They don't like our business.
I think Bernie's adding another piece that was, Scott read to us the piece that actually said that the treasurer can step in as vice chair or chair in their absence.
Right.
So, I mean, that cleared up a lot of that for me as well.
Yep. So with that, if there are any questions or comments, I'd ask for a motion on that.
Move approval, Mr. Chair.
Motion by Boss, second by Gatto. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Abstentions? That motion carries. All right, thank you. Item 10 is a report and vote on the loan transfer request for Iowa DOT. No?
Thank you. Several years ago, the MPO received a loan from the Iowa DOT's Railroad Revolving Loan Fund. This is for the transit facility. It's a $1.7 million loan. This is when there was no operator yet selected, so the MPO received the loan, and then when the operator was selected, the MPO turns around and gives that money to the operator. Now we're in the repayment phase, so Des Moines Industrial pays the MPO repays the Iowa DOT. Iowa DOT has come to us with the proposal that we just cut the MPO out of this and give the loan directly to Des Moines Industrial. This was their proposal. Des Moines Industrial is on board with this, and we talked about this with the executive committee. You seem supportive as well. Iowa DOT just wants a letter of request from us to the DOT requesting it, even though it's their idea. So Scott has drafted that for us. I meant to have that for us today for you to review. It's a pretty simple letter just telling us what the DOT asked us to say to them. And with your blessing, we'd like to send that off and get out of this business of being involved with the rail loan. If there's any questions, I have to take that.
So moved.
All right, second motion. Mike, you move that? Sorry. Yeah, okay, motion by Mike, second by Lynn. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Same sign. Abstentions? That motion carries. Item 11 is report and vote on the planning area boundary update. Zach.
Thank you. The planning area boundary is something we discussed back at the November meeting. If you recall, it's something that has to capture the urban area boundary, which we approved back in September of 2023, as well as any of the growth that the region is anticipating the next 20 years. So staff worked with your member governments, your tech committee members, to look at the areas that might be expanding and determine where we might need to push our planning area boundary out. On this next slide here, you'll see a map of our new proposed planning area boundary. Since we discussed this back in November, really the only changes that we're looking at is that Polk County has requested that the entire county come into our planning area boundary. And then also we had a comment at our tech meeting that Mitchellville, their city limits are kind of going into Jasper County. We need to capture all of Mitchellville. So you can see a little tiny bump out in our boundary there along the border there where Mitchellville goes into Jasper County. The other two areas we discussed back in November down in the southern portion around Carlisle and Norwalk, where we need to push it out to capture the areas in their comp plan. And then over on the west side, Adel was encroaching into the existing planning area boundary, and to not have Adel in our member or planning area boundary, we need to bring that back in a little bit so that they're not included in our planning area boundary. With your approval today, we will move forward with our new planning area boundary being represented by that solid dotted line there. I'm happy to take any questions you might have about the planning area boundary. I would note that CERPA has to approve this. They did discuss it at their meeting this morning, and we'll probably be approving it at their meeting next month. Is that correct, Andrew? Their March meeting. So happy to take any questions if you have them. Otherwise, this is before you for your approval.
All right, thanks, Zach. Questions? Motion.
I would move approval of the new boundaries as presented.
Snell,
Murray second.
second by Murray. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Abstentions. Motion carries. Item 12 is a report and vote on mobilizing tomorrow funding projections. Zach.
Thank you. This is also something we discussed back in November. Staff has developed funding projections for the next long-range plan. In the past, we had to do projections all the way out to the end of the plan, which goes up to 2050. New rules by federal highway only requires us to look at the first 10 years of the plan. So for this plan update, we will be looking at funding projections for 2025 through 2024. So staff has developed those, looking at various different funding sources, including the federal sources, STBG, TAP, carbon reduction program funds, the MPO controls. We also look at state reduced tax funds, local property taxes, and bonds as well. On the screen here before you can see the annual growth rates that we determined, looking at kind of historical records and then kind of taking a more conservative approach. We presented these to the finance subcommittee back in November. They approved these rates. They've also been reviewed by the Iowa DOT, and we got their sign off on those rates as well. On the next slide, you'll see a table that kind of outlines what those funding projections look like. I would make a couple of notes. One, on local funding, what we've observed in historical data is about 40% of local funding is spent on construction projects. So we did take the total local funding and took 40% of that to accurately predict how much of the funding would be available for actual construction projects. So at the end of the day, we're looking at about a little over $2.5 billion available over that 10-year period for transportation projects in the region. I think I might have one more slide here. Yep, DOT funds. We did not talk about this back in November, but since that time, we have worked with the Iowa DOT to develop their funding projections using a 2% growth rate that they were happy with, and determined that we'll have about $584 million in Iowa DOT funding available during that same time period. As far as DART goes, we have been talking with DART, working through how we're going to do their funding projections. As I think most of you are aware, DART's working through some things. So in our discussions with them, we'll probably be looking at having some projections from them, probably late February, March sometime. I believe that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, this is before you for your approval.
Questions?
Moved.
So by Mike,
Second.
second by Mark. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Abstentions? That motion carries. Thank you, Zach. Item 13 is report on mobilizing tomorrow project solicitation.
Just wanted to quickly make you aware that staff has been developing a Google form to send out to the tech committee to solicit projects for the long range plan. We should be wrapping up the last few changes we're making to that form by the end of the week, and then early next week, we'll send that out to the tech committee, looking to collect projects for that 2025 to 2034 time period. Looking at system capacity, major reconstruction projects, system optimization, bridges, transit, bike bed, basically all the things we look at for STBG projects and TAP projects. So we'll collect all those projects. We anticipate giving the tech members about a month to submit those projects to us, and then we'll start reviewing them. But just want to make you aware that that's kind of the next big step in the long range plan process that we'll be kicking off here next week. We're happy to take any questions.
All right, questions? Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
Item 14 is report on the North Southern Rail Spur Track Assessment.
Thank you. I want to bring to your attention a interesting project that's been brought to our attention, or the potential for it, and that is a passenger rail opportunity on this, what we're calling the Norfolk Southern Rail Spur. And on the next page, I think there's a map of what that looks like. This is a rail spur that, the spur itself starts about the western edge of Butterworks Park and goes northwest through Western Moines, Windsor Heights, Clyde, Riverdale, and Grimes. There would have to be a little connection into downtown too, potentially. But this is brought to us through the company that owns the Iowa Interstate Railroad. So the Iowa Interstate Railroad is owned by a company called the Railroad Development Corporation. They also have another company called Pop-Up Metro. And Pop-Up Metro's business model is to take underutilized freight corridors such as this and put passenger rail on it. And they do that in a more of a temporary fashion. Their pitch is that for the price you would pay for a engineering feasibility study to determine whether or not passenger rail would work, they'll just give you the equipment and everything to let you run it and run it for a couple of years and see if it actually works. So we've been in talks with them over the last couple of years, along with Iowa DOT. Iowa DOT is really the one that has brought this to us, given our role in the metro and coordinating these kind of things. Where we're at with the conversations is that to determine whether this is viable, and to determine issues such as what the speeds would be, what the schedules would be, how the frequency and so forth, they need to do an assessment of the existing track. And that would also include the crossings, safety issues, and so forth. Pop-Up Metro is estimating that that would cost about $25,000. We talked with the executive committee back in December, right, about this. And it was at the end of a long meeting, and they said, well, let's talk about it in the policy committee. In the time between then, we've also talked to several of the members along the corridor about this from the local governments. We've also talked to private sector parties, developers that own land along the corridor, business owners that might have an interest in this. There's a lot of excitement about it, and a lot of every private developer we've talked to said that they're willing to contribute to that $25,000. Iowa DOT has said that they potentially are in for half of that money as well. They're still trying to figure out their funding sources and making sure that they can do that, but that's their indication is that they would pay that half. So what we want to talk to you about, I think if you go to the next slide, one is what role does the MPO have in this? As we look through the decision tool that was approved several months ago, we see that this is a role that the MPO should play in terms of the facilitation and discussion and planning of it, not the operations of it. That would come later to determine that. But assuming that the MPO does have the role in taking this on, is starting to look at how do we take the next step of this $25,000 study. Like I said, we put together a little bit of a proposal of what that funding could look like. I mentioned the DOT and the private parties. It's also possible that the corridor communities and maybe even the MPO puts into that. $25,000 split several ways means not a lot for any one contributor. And private parties have even said, tell us how much and how soon you need it, but they understand if others want to participate as well. But really, we just want to hear feedback from you. Is this something you want us to pursue? We'll take the next steps accordingly. Open the questions.
So I had an interesting conversation with Henry Posner from Iowa Interstate and his staff at an informal Iowa State Fair gathering. sounded interesting. I know that, Urbandale has chatted a little bit about this previously, but, you know, for $25,000 just to take a look, at one time, the speed on this track was pretty low. It wouldn't make a lot of sense if it was as low as had been projected a few years ago, but if it could be sped up a little bit, it wouldn't. I mean, that's a diagonal route. That would save some time getting to downtown. And it could be a nice buy for the community just to be talking about it. I don't, you know, as we all know, we're not a large enough metropolitan area for light rail to support that. But if there's something that's already existing that could work in some fashion.
A question on the cost. I mean, you sort of frame the cost as the cost to do a study. And my understanding is that the cost was $3 to $5 million a year to get the equipment and run it. I mean, that's a lot more than the cost to do a study.
This would be the first step in determining how much it costs, the $3 to $5 million per year. And that, so doing that $25,000 study would tell us, just what Carl was alluding to, what the speed of the track allows today. If we want to upgrade it to higher class of rail, what would that cost? And then that's all baked into that annual fee you're referring to. So this would be necessary to tell us what that operation cost would be. Then that'd be another decision point. Do we want to take that on?
Right, whether it's on that high, but I guess the piece that seemed known was the cost of the railroad, the cost of the rail cars, the cost of having a handful of temporary stops. And that's regardless of the upgrade. I mean, I'm pretty skeptical of this, and particularly when we're struggling to fund transit in this region already. And I'm not sure who would, I mean, this came before the DART Executive Committee at one point. We took a pass on it, looking at it. I mean, if folks want to put some money into the basic piece of this to further the conversation, I mean, fine, but I'm pretty skeptical that that's at this juncture, a good use of time and dollars.
Well, if you learned more about it, that would be great to hear. You know, just because the idea was rejected once previously doesn't mean that its time has come to take another look at it. So it may not work, but I encourage you to explore more and just get some bare bones of what this could be. So
I think at $25,000, that's a worthwhile investment.
I'm kind of following along Josh's piece of this. I mean, reality of it is those maintenance and things are normally performed by the railroad at their own expense. Now we're getting a whole bunch of other people to do, quite frankly, what the railroad should be funding to do that piece. Pop-Up Metro is currently operating 2 battery-powered train sets and a demonstration operation in Pennsylvania on 1.8 miles of track. That's really their only activity that I'm aware of that I can find in any of the research. So that's a little problematic to me. They don't really have any experience yet, if you will, running on a tourist railroad that actually went bankrupt, if you go back in 2011 and just started back up in 2011, still doing just tourist rail operations. We don't really have a projection of actual lease fees, any understanding involving a fee structure. And would that involve only the cities along the route or all cities across the metro expected to pony up money to make that work? I agree with Josh. We're struggling right now with DART. That is a big piece of this. Grimes obviously has expressed that they're walking away from DART or have submitted notice. And that was, again, we're talking passenger rail. I understand there's some major freight businesses along there that probably would benefit from this. I'm not so excited about us talking about it as a passenger service, if you will. There's several lumber companies, a cannery, obviously, a steel company. There's others that benefit from that rail service. And I'm hoping some of them contributors.
Well, that's already currently out.
Right,
Yeah.
but the worse the track gets, those operations could cease, or the railroad would say, we're pulling out, we're closing that spur, they can make application for that. And that's happened around the Midwest and specifically in the metro, where we've had rail abandoned altogether, so.
And to your point too, on the cost of this, and Iowa Interstate Railroad and the maintenance, Iowa Interstate Railroad is the operator, Norfolk Southern is the owner of it, so that's
Correct.
why they're looking for someone else to help pay them, before they decide whether they want to buy it from Norfolk Southern, they want to see if there's interest in the locals to do this, and they don't want to put money into it to upgrade it and do the study, so that's why they're asking for that. The other, I guess, flip side of this is if there's not interest and Norfolk Southern sells it and Iowa Interstate doesn't want to buy it, it'll be abandoned and it'll likely become a really interesting trail. So either way, there's a transportation implication for our future. It's just do we want to investigate the passenger rail angle first, or let the market play out and have it be abandoned and then look into the trail per se. Staff is obviously flexible with this. We want to bring it to you and see what direction you want us to go in.
I think, frankly, I think it's at least investigate it. Why not investigate it for 25,000? I think there's probably, it sounds like there maybe is at least enough interest to do that, that the MPO doesn't have to pony up the money, that we find that, I think we can find that between the joining communities. I think they'll certainly contribute a small amount to that. Similar to, to get that up there, so you said 25,000 doesn't have to be a lot for any one person. Split that up between cities and other parties, but I don't think the MPO necessarily needs to put any seed money into it, but other than to maybe try to compete things, just take a look at it. Why not? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
If you want to support it, I'm fine with that, as long as we're not taking money out of the MPO.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
So, Mr. Chair, just a question, are you just asking us to vote to give up to $2,500 of MPO dollars? Is that what we're discussing?
There's no vote today, Joe. This is just a presentation on it, so.
Okay.
So we're not asking for any money today. I think we have a marching order. We'll just to carry it further to see if there can be enough of a critical mass to put the necessary amount together without having MPO do this, but be at least an MPO be involved and be a convener on this.
Yeah, obviously it's a form of transportation. The MPO should be involved. I'm just not sure at what level and where it would be at the end of the study and where it would be. Obviously, each community would have to build some type of their own, station where people are going to get on and off. I don't think that would be NPO. That would be each individual community would do that. But yeah, I mean, if you're just asking for $2,500, we've spent more than $2,500 on lots of other non-transportation things in this organization. This is definitely a transportation, but if that's not, if we're trying to just have a discussion, then I guess you need to come back and ask of what dollar amount you're asking from the MPO, and then we can all make a decision at that point.
Correct. I think at this point, we're just saying we should at least convene this at all and carry this forward. I think there's enough interest, probably, as what Dylan said, from other parties, including DOT and private parties.
Right.
Probably without having the MPO.
So we'll continue to
Sounds
explore
good.
this, keep you in the loop on what we find out and come back with a little more structure to what this could look like in the future.
Thanks, Dylan. Item 15 is a report on the FY25 Unified Planning Work Program and Budget.
Thank you. I'll go through this relatively quickly, but for some of you that are new, I don't want to skip over it entirely. The MPO is required to put together an annual work program and budget every fiscal year. We work on the state fiscal year, which starts July 1st. There's a couple of due dates coming up. By April 1st, we have to submit a draft to the Iowa DOT and the Federal Highway Administration for their review. And then June 1st is the final deadline to submit those. If you go to the next slide, there's a couple of key things that the MPO is required to do every year. So our work program has to show how we're going to comply with these and show that we're meeting all the requirements put upon us. It also identifies all the studies, the work products, the committees that are going to do work, the funding, and so forth that goes into that. to get to the point of what we're looking at here, there's also some emphasis areas that USDOT puts out that we have to show we comply with as well. So coming up in the next couple of months here, we are starting to put this together. Next month, we'll probably have more information for you on the actual budget side of things. But right now, we're soliciting input from our member communities. We talked to the tech committee, what plans, studies, research, technical analysis, technical assistance do you want to see so we can understand that when we start to put together our budget for work program. We're asking for that by the end of the month. It's not a hard deadline. Obviously, we're working on this through draft format through the end of May. So there's time to get things in there, but the sooner the better. I do want to mention too, if you go to the next slide, there's, like I said, we'll have anticipated budget numbers in February. A couple things that are playing into that. One, the executive director search and not knowing what that's exactly going to be. Also with that search, there's a staff salary survey that's ongoing. So those results we'll have to incorporate in there at some point. We've talked over the last year about MIPA and that contract. And so MIPA and CERPA contracts are anticipated to go away by the end of this fiscal year. Timing of that's to be determined. But for sure by the next fiscal year's budget, those contracts will not be in there anymore. We're also making budget adjustments based on the policies and procedures manual, the handbook and so forth that's been approved. And then we also been making budget updates based on some updates to benefits to the contract with Connect by HR. And we'll talk about that later on in the agenda too. So with that, happy to take any questions, but just more of a notice that you'll hear more about this over the next several months.
Any questions? Item 16 is a report on the Iowa DOT 2020 to 2024 safety performance targets. Lee?
Thank you. So every year as part of the Federal Highway Administration's Highway Safety Improvement Plan, state DOTs and MPOs have to annually report safety performance measures. MPOs have the option to either adopt the state DOT's performance measures or establish their own regional ones. For the previous period, the MPO adopted the state DOT's statewide measures, but the MPO has continued to monitor regional safety performance. So in the table on your
as we did it. We're collecting a lot more data now. We've also got a new 360 camera that allows us to update the imagery of our trails on Google Street View. So you can use Google Street View and travel on our trails now in the same method that you can on our normal roads. We improved the rear camera as well, and also we're able to take advantage of an intern hired from ISU to collect most of that data.
Yeah.
So we took that data and put it in a story map that we published online. That link will be shared out to you if you'd like to take a look in more detail. But overall, our trails are from a roughness standpoint, are in pretty good condition. 94% of our trails are either very smooth or smooth, with just about 6% being in that more of a caution color yellow. So one thing that our system is being upgraded is to measure crack severity, which a lot of our metro members have started to take notice because of drought conditions. With some separation in the pavement that doesn't necessarily correlate to roughness. However, we're working with the ISU to upgrade our system that will then take that crack severity into consideration in the future. So I would wager that our data is going to get much more robust. Yeah. So we haven't taken any questions that you have, but feel free to look at the link in your packet, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have via email as well after the meeting.
So at one of the recent bike pad roundtables, the city of Des Moines reported alarmingly on trails that are even as new as 2 years old, asphalt trails, that they believe the severe drought has opened up sizable cracks. And I don't know if the other communities have also taken a look at this, but this is something that was unexpected regarding the drought conditions. So we, the city, is probably going to have to bump up our budget to fill those cracks, even new surfaces at Grays Lakes and elsewhere. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard more stuff. In writing, I haven't noticed it yet. You noticed it all?
Yeah, even on a new trail that connects Mullets to Easter Lake. I can't remember the name of the trail, but it's a pretty nice trail, and there's I think it's
got somebody's name.
Yeah, some guy, I don't know. Anyway, yes. So
I will point out in the online map, there is a heat map that shows where those hot spots of cracking are, because our rear photos from the rear camera actually depict the cracks in the pavement. We can't measure severity of them. We just measure that, yes, there is a crack in that photo, and you can see in the heat map, and then zoom down into the trail and click on each photo and see the severity of the crack. So we do publish some sort of condition in that sense. However, we just can't measure the severity of those cracks in this map.
just one additional item, I think in the city's trail work this next year, any of the replacement trails are going to be concrete.
We've been doing mostly.
Yeah.
So ECC.
I'm just curious on the area that you surveyed, is it strictly within the MPO area or is it out beyond that?
Previously, when we did the regional trails, we just did inside the MPO boundary. We thought that this year it'd be, because the Iowa Trails is all encompassing, that it'd be good just to do the entire trail, even outside the MPO boundary.
The reason I bring that up is because we've got a significant one that we're looking at doing, we already have talked about through CERT. It actually involves a Polk County and Warren County connection down through the Northwestern Trail going south and west. That trail's in bad shape, very bad shape. You get south of Cumming and it's not good at all.
We did the entire trail down to Martinsville.
Yeah, okay, so I'm sure that's in that 6%.
In the part down the Great Western Trail south of Cumming. Yes, and we did the entire Recton River Valley Trail, Hard Bio Trail, and we have the fun stuff, so.
All right, any further questions, comments? All right, thank you, Carl. Sure. Sure.
We said, thank you, Carl.
Oh, thank you, Carl. Item 18 is a report on the Purple Heart Highway.
I'm gonna keep this pretty brief for you all. If you're new to this issue and want to have a deeper dive on this, happy to set up time to debrief you separately. But you all recall that we have an Iowa DOT action plan for getting interstate designation for the 28-mile corridor known as Purple Heart Highway. And we have moved into the next phases of that. We are still pursuing that action plan. Recently, through additional conversations with our stakeholders, we've identified some additional steps, notably an alternatives analysis. When we brought this to our ag stakeholders, they were very much in favor of doing this. And we recently brought a funding strategy to the executive committee for their review. And what we want to do today is provide you with let me back up and say that the alternatives analysis will be part of a larger corridor master plan. The alternatives analysis would be that first foundational piece to understand options for our ag stakeholders who are currently using the corridor. What we want to do today is get you up to speed on some movement on this project. Representative Losi has introduced language for drafting for a potential bill this year. And so we want to make sure that you all had situation awareness that there is movement on this. We have had numerous conversations with Iowa Farm Bureau as well as other state ag stakeholders, and we'll continue having those conversations throughout this process. I will note that there are two pieces in the bill this session. One is the minimum speed exemption that we have talked about that would take place only in the event that interstate designation is occurred. And another trigger would be that it would be in place only until an alternative is identified and built. The other thing that it would include is up to $250,000 or roughly half the cost of an alternatives analysis. So again, just want to make sure you all have situational awareness on this. Lastly, I'd like to pass it off to Supervisor Snell. He's been very engaged in this process and he was part of our touch base with Representative Losi this morning. Just ask him to share a few thoughts that he has.
Yes, and in fact, we've had a meeting as recently as this morning up at the state capitol with Representative Losi. He confirmed all of these items. The process it's wonderful to see us actually making progress on this now, meaningful progress. I believe that we are at a point where we are going to probably see the state take action this legislative session. All the pieces are moving into place in the right way. And we even have, as of this morning, we now have a one-pager that basically identifies all the key issues that have just been outlined here as well, and the key steps that we need to engage in. As far as the engagement with other parties, it would appear that people are lining up and working together here. We've, I think, overcome some of the past barriers of some of the stakeholders involved. The ag community in particular, it's amazing to see that they recognize that the position, if we do nothing, they're in a lose-lose situation. So it's to their benefit to actually engage in this now because they can see going down the road, if they do nothing, they're going to be forced off the roads and have no alternative. So from that standpoint, it's positive that they want to engage with us and get this done. I couldn't help, excuse me, I couldn't help but think as we were listening to the Transportation American person, I think some of the things she was talking about, the planning aspect of it, I wrote some notes down here because I think this project in particular is right for exactly what she was talking about. So I think in terms of going after some planning dollars, this project would probably be right smack dab in the middle of what she was talking about. So I would urge us, especially after hearing her presentation today, to pursue that. We've got the corridor study, which involves the comprehensive plans and the economic development aspect of things. Just to give you all an update, Warren County is completing a comprehensive land use plan right now. Norwalk did it last year. Others are doing it as well. I think all those can be put together we use some of this federal money to pull it all together, I think we have quite a story to tell. What a difference it can make to have this area be designated as an interstate highway. So it's positive as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks for presenting.
Yeah, and we are actually putting together a, what do you call that, an advisory group, or what are we gonna call that group?
I think it's subject to, subject to discussion and advisory group or steering committee.
We're looking at actually taking several of us that are here in this body and taking a subset and kind of getting us together a little bit more concentrated effort.
Yeah.
And to kind of drive this home a little bit further. I think the next year and a half could be very, very instrumental in terms of where this really goes and whether or not it really becomes reality. It's taken a long time for us to get to this point, way too long, and it's time to move it forward. I think the opportunity is there.
Thanks. Thanks, Gunnar. Any further comments or questions on that?
Just that you will be hearing from us. This is very much a team sport, especially where we're at right now, and we're gonna need support and relationships and leverage all those assets that we have.
Item 19, Director report, Bill.
Thank you. Apologize for the long meeting, but we're gonna have a couple items here to run through. First of all, just want to give an update on member presentations. We're still kicking through those. We were in Metropolitan earlier this week, and we'll continue to hit the communities we have yet to hit. Now, the next slide, we've talked about the three key recommendations based on meeting with all of you over the last several months. And we're working towards all of these. So we talked about strategic planning and the long-range plan. Beth Osborne's presentation earlier today was really a key piece of that and helping us understand where we can be strategic with our funding asks. We've talked about the decision tree. We've been putting that in action. We'll continue to do that with the work program that's coming up too. And then board assessment. We've working through selection for the executive committee this time. It's pointed out a couple of things that we need to improve upon. So that's something that we'll start taking a crack at here pretty soon. A couple miscellaneous things, a couple funding updates. Over the last several months, we've talked about the MPO's application to the charging and fueling infrastructure. For a long time, I think we applied for that back in April. We just found out a couple weeks ago that we were unsuccessful in that. There'll be future rounds. I think we know what to look for now and what to do. So if there's interest in reapplying, we'll look at that. City of Grimes, however, though, was successful in a Safe Streets and Roads for All planning grant. That's the grant Beth Osborne said there's a lot of money for. That's a supplemental study on Highway 141 that'll tag along with the MPO Safe Streets and Roads for All project. So we'll be coordinating with them. They won't use the same consultant. They're responsible for it. It's not us, but they'll definitely be coordinating on that. Speaking of our Safe Streets and Roads for All program, we're getting a transportation safety committee put together, and that group will be meeting probably in February 8th or 9th, somewhere near exactly. So that's finally getting going. We've been meeting with the consultant team over the last several months, but now it'll start becoming a little more involved in the communities and the stakeholders in that process. Speaking of Zach, over the last time this group met, we talked about a contract to make it a contract employee. We've successfully implemented that. I will point out that for public appearances and just not to cause confusion, he still shows up on our website and so forth as an employee. So if you see that, don't be alarmed. We did execute that contract. One thing that came up after the last board meeting was the idea of virtual attendance policy, given the lack of people here today and understanding there's weather at play as well. But this is something that I think the executive committee, and I'm curious to hear feedback from this group, looking at more of an attendance policy that expects you to be here unless you have a extenuating circumstance, then virtual is an option. So if that's of interest, I know Metro Waste and some others have looked at this as well, so that's something we can look into. We talked about some state house issues, just to point out how to not register as lobbyists as we typically do going forward. If you go to the next slide, I think I mentioned earlier in the presentation Connectify HR, and I wanted to give an update on this. Connectify HR is a company, it's a Des Moines-based company, it's a professional employment organization. They provide kind of a whole suite of HR payroll services. We had looked into changing our payroll system and benefits administration and so forth because of some issues that we've had. This came recommended to us by InvestDSN. Also found out that Bravo Greater Des Moines uses them, and they both have nothing but good things to say. We took this to our finance subcommittee as well as the executive committee in December. And then took it as more of a concept and a budget item to talk about the expenses and to get approval going forward with that. We did execute the contract after that. In our analysis of it, the savings that we would see from switching to Connectify from our current provider, as well as changing our deferred compensation program from principal who we use now to the state's retirement investment club, those collectively would save us about $10,000 annually. So after that, if you go to the next slide, Councilmember Murray had some questions that he raised last week at the executive committee meeting and wanted to see the contract, so we did provide that to him. Last night, we received some questions and concerns, so we worked throughout the day to address those and got those to Len right before the meeting here, so hopefully he's had a little chance with this long meeting to look through those. I want to give Len an opportunity to address any concerns or speak to that. So I'll turn it over to Len.
My only comments is obviously I just received that copy and I understand I didn't get questions to you until late last night. I mean, really late. So I haven't really had a chance to review that in detail, trying to pay attention to the meeting as well. I need some time to review, understand the response. I still have some questions about process, still some concerns about eligibility for our employees as we talk about IPERS. There's some information we've received from IPERS attorneys that still doesn't really lay things out in my mind clearly about how that works and whether there's a regulatory issue with the state or not. That's not been defined yet. To me, the whole thing is, I mean, the MPO as an organization and our employees are very important to me, and I want to make sure we're on firm footing and doing the right thing. And, it's going to take me a little bit more time to get my arms around this, but I appreciate the conversation and the response. I just need to delve into that deeper.
Yeah, and I appreciate your looking into this matter. We do appreciate that. I do want to acknowledge the process, and that was a lot of your questions. Typically, traditionally, I would say we haven't taken matters like this to the board or to legal for that matter, when it comes to payroll, benefits administration, IT support, you know, those kind of routine contracts that we have. Obviously, this one does have a little bit different situation because of that co-employment relationship. So I would say we acknowledge that we didn't bring them to you. If that's something you want to see in the future, we're totally happy to make that a routine thing to bring those types of contracts or discussions and so forth to this committee. So I'll say that.
And I would say yes, in the interest of transparency, I think everybody that's a member should have received a copy of that contract, had an opportunity for a clear presentation on it. I understand the threshold, it still appears it's under 25,000. There's some question in my mind about all these additional fees and costs associated with the contract, that it could be higher than expected. But if we take the time to bring things to us like a planning matrix, you know, for review and a vote, to me, this is much more critical and important when we're talking about the operation. So I would like to see those things in the future openly transmitted, presented, and all of us have a chance to look at it before it goes forward, and legal should review before any signature goes on a piece of paper.
So why don't we, we'll take.
Have we signed the contract yet, or?
We have.
Okay.
So we're in the process of onboarding now. Our first, really, will be fully onboarded next week and start. We'll start our payroll. So if there's direction on that, happy to take that. But
We can still review though too, and if there are true concerns, or if we need to, come back and try to modify some things, I think we probably can. They are a company that's, from what I can tell, is, first of all, they're a local company and they're somewhat responsive, so if we need to tweak some things, I think we can probably do that.
Well, I can just speak as a board member of Invest DSM. We're fully happy with this company and managing our HR benefits, so.
I don't know that it was after the fact.
Dylan, did you say you already signed the contract? Is that what I heard you say?
And then after the executive committee approved the expenditure last month.
December 21st.
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. Did you say you signed the contract?
We signed it after the executive committee approved the expenditure last month, so after the executive committee, December 21st was the date.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought that we gave you approval to do that, through that meeting. So, yeah, okay.
All right, so we'll certainly respond and we need
And we can share the comments if you're open to that, like, if you want your comments shared and our responses to that with the rest of the board, we're happy to do that. So just out of the matter of
I'm
transparency.
all about transparency and getting it out there. I just wish we.
We have paper copies for the couple people in the room, but given the not many people here, we'll just send out.
All right, anything else for the good of the order today? Thanks for sticking through us for a long meeting. We stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Mark, that's you.
Actually, slow down.
Really? Leadership.